This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi, Shannon.
Hey, Tanya.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I am doing great. Still acclimating to the new job, and I won't mention it again, but...
No, you mention it every time. This is a transition.
It's a huge transition. Like, I'm still getting used to geting up early. You know, I'm not a early bird. I've never been an early bird.
Call myself a morning person.
Yeah, I'm not a morning person. No. So I'm trying to be a morning person and trying to stamp out the night owl in me.
Yes.
So I can get some sleep. But
those are some big changes for sure.
What about you?
Well, I am totally loving. So today, this is my favorite time of year. Like, you can shut your air off and let the wind, and then you might have to turn on the heat later.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow, turn the air on. Perfect. Shut everything down. Open the windows again.
Yeah.
But, we're going to be locked up here, pretty shortly with this same breathing air in the house. We need to get these windows some freshness. And I do love it. And I burn, it's like I burn my patchouli and the sage. And it's so smoky in the house, but it's so pure. So that's all I've been up to.
I do love the fall. It's great. I love the crisp weather. And like you said, I will get in my car in the morning and turn the heat on. And on my way home, I've got the air conditioner on. So.
Exactly. Sit out on the porch. I got to put my Baja on.
Yeah.
But it's nice because it's just the kiss of coolness. And then that means Halloween and all that good stuff. So
yeah, exactly.
On the way.
You like the
fall. So what you got for us today?
Well, I have a crazy story. It's an oldie but a goodie. It takes place in the 1930s.
Okay.
These cases always kind of fascinate me because I'm a history nerd. Yes. But they fascinate me because of the shit people did. Because like nowadays, you can't get away with shit. Like there's cameras out there. Your phone gets tracked. Like, you can never cover your tracks 100%. But back then, people could. But before I get into it, I want to remind everyone to hit subscribe or follow on whatever app you're listening to. And I am going to tell you about the murder of Michael Malloy.
Okay.
So if you remember in history, the Prohibition. The Prohibition Act was ratified into law in 1920. Okay. It was the 18th Amendment to our Constitution, and it made it illegal to manufacture alcohol, sell it, import it. You couldn't, nothing to do with alcohol. Okay. Wow. As the country is drying up, basically, because you're not allowed to go anywhere and drink it. You're not allowed to buy it.
Oh, my gosh.
Places like speakeasies. Have you heard of speakeasies?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so speakeasies start to pop up. And what a speakeasy is, it came from illegal drinking establishments that were in England and Ireland in the 19th century. They were called speak softly shops. So that's where it kind of evolved. Like speakeasies evolved from that. So it was estimated, though, that there were more than 30,000 speakeasies in New York City alone.
Oh, my God.
In 1929. Okay, so everybody's drinking stuff.
Yes, everybody's out at night.
Right. So a speakeasy didn't have to really be anything fancy either. Like you would see in the movies or something. Sometimes it would just be a room and some liquor. So the range of establishments that they had, it was vast. Like it would be, luxurious speakeasy sometimes. Sometimes it would just be a cellar in someone's house. They I'd set up some tables.
I always picture every speakeasy jazz, the big cello being spun.
Right.
Is someone on the bugle or the cornet? Yeah. Everyone's bopping and bebopping.
Exactly. Like then you expect this, like you picture like this glamorous.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Everybody's dressed in beautiful gowns and furs.
What are those girls when they had the little swinger dresses or
right.
haircuts? Yes.
Mm-hmm. But it wasn't always like that.
No.
So 1929 in American history, also we had the Great Depression. Right. The stock market crashed in 1929. And that's where the Great Depression started from. We had this big crash. People lost their money, some of them their fortunes and everything. So this is
nobody can drink.
Right. And nobody can drink legally.
Oh, yeah.
But it sounds like Air Buddy's getting drunk, right?
Yeah, Air Buddy, right.
Air Buddy. So there was a place called Marino's. Okay. And it was just a little place. It had 4 tables, chairs. It had a well-used sofa on one end, a makeshift 12-foot bar in the middle. There was a toilet on the other end that was blocked from view. So, patrons could go to the bathroom.
Sure.
But it was like a little flimsy partition. Pretty much the regulars that came to Marino's were criminals and derelicts. And those were the people, I think, that the whole Prohibition thing was meant to dry out. Yeah. I don't think they meant to dry out, Mr. America next door. I think it was meant to focus on people that were more of the unsavory characters. So Tony Marino himself, the owner, he was a disaster of a person. He was 27 at the time our story takes place.
Okay.
And he was riddled with venereal disease.
Oh, brother.
Okay? He had syphilis and gonorrhea. Okay.
Oh, my gosh.
And he really didn't rush to the doctor at the time to treat any of his ailments. So they did reach an advanced stage on him with physical marks, which were like abscesses that developed in his groin area. And he spoke about that every now and then. And
just openly?
Yeah, just openly. And and this charmer, he passed these STDs onto his wife because he was married at the time. So his wife, Eleanor, she wasn't aware that she had any of these diseases until she was pregnant and visited the doctor, and the doctor told her. So as you can imagine, it wasn't the best marriage between Eleanor and Tony.
No.
She said the way that she described Tony was that she said he had a nasty temper. He was prone to violent tantrums, and he would often smash furniture in their house. So, yeah. He once put the stove into the hallway and took an axe to it. And his wife also said, quote, on several occasions, he threatened to turn the gas on in our bedroom and kill the baby and myself.
Oh, my gosh.
So this is Tony.
A real charmer.
Yeah, real charmer. His behavior was attributed to a childhood fall that he had where he got a concussion, and his family said, ever since then, he kind of wasn't the same.
Kind of off.
Yeah, kind of off. He ended up attempting suicide twice before he was 16. Wow. And during his marriage to Eleanor, she left him a few times here and there. But at the time of our story, she and Tony and their son, their baby son, were living with Tony's father and his sister. And both women, Eleanor and Tony's sister, he would beat them every day. So he was an abuser.
Tony would beat his wife and his own sister.
Okay.
Yeah. And Dad would just let this. Dad said nothing.
Apparently, I don't know if Dad's joining in or whatever, but
right. Okay.
So at Marino's bar, Tony employed a man who went by the name of Joseph, and he actually went by Red. Joseph Murphy. He was the bartender. So Red first met Tony as a patron of the place. He was one of the regulars that would come to Marino's. Tony eventually hired him to pour the drinks for $1 a day. That's how much he earned. And the side benefit, though, was sampling the inventory. Plus he had like a semi-warm place maybe to crash when he needed.
Yeah, right.
He could sleep on that sofa I mentioned. And so it wasn't bad. It's kind of a cushy setup for like a homeless alcoholic.
Yeah, really.
In the middle of the Great Depression.
Setup. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Right. Like he probably didn't have a penny to his name, but he's able to earn a little bit of money and crash there as well.
Right.
So Joseph Murphy, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was born Archie Mott on May 24th, 1906. He was taken off the streets at the age of 10 and placed in the care of several different foster families and a boys' school. He was taken to Mansfield State Training School and Hospital at around 13 years old, where he would remain a mental patient until his early 20s. While he was in the hospital, he was found by psychiatrists to have the mental age of 9 years and 6 months and an IQ of 56. And on July 31st, 1929, he snuck away from the hospital. He was able to make just enough from odd jobs on the street to keep his alcohol addiction going. And in 1932 is when he wandered into Marino's bar. And Tony, took pity on him and gave him this job.
Right.
There's a lot of people in this story. So we have Red and we have Tony so far.
Yes.
So the next guy I'm going to tell you about, his name is Frank Pasqua. Okay. He was another regular of Marino's speakeasy. He was 24 with a wife and son at home. And Frank began working for his father at the age of 17 at Pasqua's burial service, which was located in Harlem.
Okay.
He found it really difficult to engage in any kind of meaningful conversation in that career, as you can imagine.
I bet.
And so he would often stop by Marino's place at the end of the day to grab a drink and socialize. He talked to Tony about, being a dad and husbands, and he was able to speak to him in Italian because Frank's Italian too, right? Their native language. So Tony and Frank, they were often seen talking to another guy. His name is David Kriesberg. So now we have Tony, Red, the bartender, Frank, and Dan. Daniel. And Daniel Kriesberg was a 29-year-old wholesale grocer and father of three. Just to let you know, there was never any accusations from either Frank or Daniel's spouses that they ever got abused by their husbands. So, by all accounts, they seem to have loving and good marriages. So I'm just throwing that out there to kind of
good to know.
Fluff up the story, right?
Yes.
So Daniel's a family man at heart, and desperation kind of drove him to a life of crime. He regularly partnered with a woman named Marie, who was Tony's cousin, as part of a gang called the Pants Bandit Duo. And Marie, what she would do is hold victims at gunpoint and take their wallets, jewelry, and money. And then she would force them to remove their pants, their trousers. That's why it was called the Pants.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Bandit Duo. She would take their pants so that the guys wouldn't chase after her and Daniel. And Daniel was the lookout. And they would, run away with the loot and the pants.
The pants. Yes.
Yeah, the pants. Okay. So now I'm going to tell you about another guy.
Okay.
His name is Michael Malloy, and he's our victim. So it's believed that he originally came to New York from Ireland. He was born in the county Dougal. He immigrated to New York in the late 1800s or early 1900s. He was a loner, had limited friends, and he didn't have any family to speak of, at least none that anyone knew about.
Right.
He worked several jobs involving different types of street cleaning. And there was a period where he worked as a stationary fireman before he found himself sweeping the streets again. He sometimes worked for Frank at his dad's burial service, the Pasqua burial service.
Right.
He would sweep floors and polish the coffins. And Frank would sometimes allow him to sleep at the mortuary as well. So on days when Michael worked at the funeral parlor, he and Frank would walk down to Marino's after work.
Right.
And eventually the walk to Marino's became a regular occurrence for Michael, regardless of whether Frank was with him or not. And he appreciated the company that the bar provided and the free lunch tray, because Tony would put out a free lunch tray, which offered the decent makings to do a sardine sandwich, which he really liked.
Wow. Yeah.
So during the early days of Michael's patronage at Tony's speakeasy, he was a good paying customer. As he came back more often, he would ask Tony if he could work in exchange for drinks. And as his bar tab began to grow, Tony cut it off in November of 1931. Michael would return to beg for drinks from now some of Tony's other customers. And when Tony's back was turned, he would approach Red, the bartender behind the bar, and steal swigs from the whiskey bottles.
Wow.
He was a bit of a nuisance, and Tony's bar was not performing very well. So things are starting to build up. In July 1932, in the quote-unquote back office of the speakeasy, which was really more like a walk-in closet, that was really partitioned off with a curtain, so there wasn't a lot of privacy, Tony, Frank, and Daniel were sitting around a table, and they began talking. Tony was watching a few barflies taking the free food from the free lunch tray, and he could see Michael and Red drinking whiskey from the bottle behind the bar. it was becoming difficult, like I told you, for him to cover the expenses of his business. So Frank looked up and he saw the same scene that Tony was taking in, like, just these people taking the free food, and Red and Michael
just having at it whiskey
right.
bottle.
Frank is an undertaker, and he regularly worked with insurance companies. So he knew a thing or two about life insurance and that death was a regular part of his day.
Yeah.
So in that moment, he suggests, why don't you take a life insurance policy out on Michael? And then he said, I'll take care of the rest. He says this to Tony. Okay.
Oh, right.
So Michael looked like he was about 60 at the time, and he must have lived like a really hard life. Like those were 60 hard years.
Yes.
And he was a drunk. He was an alcoholic. So being that, he probably looked older than what he really is.
Oh my gosh, how run down that alcohol make. Yes.
Right. But nobody's quite sure. So, they all start talking about this, that they're going to maybe, look into this, like getting an insurance policy on Michael. And Daniel was all for it too, because he could use the extra cash, right? Like,
for business. Yeah. Right.
And so they all agreed, and the group that the tabloids would eventually call the Murder Trust was born with this discussion. The first step now would be to obtain a life insurance policy for Michael, who was a homeless, unemployed alcoholic. So good luck with that, right?
Yeah, right.
And none of the men were related to him. So it's going to be difficult. But Frank went to work on this. The process of obtaining life insurance for Michael would take nearly 5 months.
Oh.
Some rejections, they stretched the truth quite a bit.
They would have to, I bet.
Yeah. And they just blatantly lied on a lot of applications. So with his eyes on being a few $100s richer, Frank approached Michael on July 29th, 1932, and offered to take him to get life insurance. So Michael's agreeable. I don't know why.
Right.
He went along with Frank to meet with an agent from Prudential Life. The agent was relatively new to the business. He ended up offering a policy that would cost $8.08 a month.
Okay.
He described the policy as having a double indemnity clause, which is that if the insured passes away, like in an accident, the policy would pay double.
Oh, wow. Right? Okay.
There's a famous old movie called Double Indemnity that I just remember. It had Barbara Stanwyck in it. She was the femme fatale. So anyway, they're like, okay, cool. They filled out the paperwork. They said that Michael lived at the address of Marino's Speakeasy, and that he was employed as a porter at Frank's funeral parlor. Michael claimed no friend or family outside of Frank, and he named him as beneficiary, saying, he gave me a job and he feeds me. So they pay the $8.08. They signed the papers, and the policy was sent in. However, during the authentication process, the insurance company questioned the fact that the person who took out the policy happened to also be the named beneficiary, and he was someone that wasn't blood related to the insured. So with numerous other discrepancies discovered during this process, the review process, the policy was rejected at the end of August, and the $8.08 was returned to Frank. So the same process was repeated in September with Prudential, and the same outcome happened.
Wow.
Now they're realizing, okay, we need to find a relative of Michael, right? So Joseph Murphy, Red, he was called on to pose as Michael's brother. And so now they're like, their trio now goes to 4. So they're going to have to split this insurance money if it ever happens. Yeah, quattro.
Yes.
But, they're like, okay, fine. It's better than not having, I guess, the life insurance policy at all. So in early November, Frank reached out to a metropolitan agent regarding a quote unquote friend who wanted some insurance. The friend had given Frank the money to purchase the policy. And when asked if the agent could meet the man, Frank said no. So, I mean, that's already shady, right?
Right.
He said he works late. It's going to be too difficult. So the agent really didn't want to push it. I'm sure he just wanted to make the sale. And he drops off a blank application the following week to Frank. As a note, this was in violation of Metropolitan's policies, which required the agent to be there in person at the time of signing. So this is just all shades.
I was just going to say the agent knew exactly what he was doing. He was dropping off a blank check that he was going to endorse for them. Just fill it out. I'll be back.
Right. So Frank provided the agent with the necessary information to fill in the application, and he signs it. Phony signature. The name on the application was Nicholas Malloy. So it's not Michael Malloy. It's Nicholas Malloy. And this is supposedly Frank's friend, Nicholas Malloy. Joseph Murphy became Joseph Malloy, Nicholas's brother. That's the beneficiary. And the application was turned in on November 16th, 1932 for a 44-year-old Nicholas Malloy, because they're now fudging Michael's
took off 16 years off Michael.
They're trying to make the application much more palatable.
For sure.
So with the name change and no other applications lying in wait, the $800 policy with a $5.02 monthly premium was accepted on December 1st, 1932.
Wow.
So meanwhile, at the bar, with all the whispered conversations and meetings behind the beaded curtain in the back room, some of the regular patrons had caught on to the fact that something shady was going on between Tony, Frank, and Daniel.
Right.
One of the people paying attention was a man named Anthony Bastoni, and he went by Tough Tony. Okay, so we have Tony Marino, but I'm going to call Anthony Bastoni Tough Tony.
Tough Tony. Got it.
Tough Tony was a 43-year-old, sometimes bartender, husband, and father of 5. Although he's said to be unemployed, he made money in the unsavory underworld by printing counterfeit money. Okay.
That's a lot of money there. Sure.
Yeah. And he had a partner that he printed this money with. His name was Joe Maglione, with whom he had a combative relationship. The two men would frequently go to Marino's, the speakeasy. They were overheard discussing their funny money operation during arguments that they had regarding splitting the profits.
Sure.
So Maglione, he had 4 children of his own that he had to provide for. So the perpetual desperation that people had during the Great Depression.
Oh my gosh.
Made pretty much everyone, I think, open to seedy behavior. Or
absolutely. That's survival behavior.
Yeah, exactly. So Tough Tony caught wind of the insurance scheme somehow. And he wanted in. So knowing Tough Tony was prone to violence and was willing to do just about anything to make a buck, Tony Marino relented. And the murder trust now has 5 members.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Oh my gosh.
So breaking down the math of the new split of the money, even with the double indemnity, it's $1,600.
Okay.
The profit that each of them are getting now is shrinking because there's 5 people that they have to split it up. And they're taking about $320, which in today's money is about $7,300.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it is a lot of money, but it's not like, $100,000 or something.
Right.
They decided that they needed more policies taken out on Michael. So they're back to the drawing board. They reach out to Prudential and they meet with a different agent. And they met with him on December 10th with a fake Nicholas Malloy in tow. And whoever was playing the role of Nicholas Malloy, it wasn't Michael.
Someone who looked 44. Right.
Yeah, right. It's unknown who actually did it. The Prudential agent began an application for weekly insurance, 2 policies using mostly the same information from the Metropolitan policies, and save for some mistakes. Frank gave a birth date that didn't match the Met policy. They're being sloppy, right?
Right.
And they shaved off another 4 years of Nicholas Malloy, so now he's only 40.
Okay.
The other inconsistencies was the signature. Originally, Frank had signed it, but he did not sign the new one for Prudential. So it's clearly 2 different signatures on these policies for Nicholas Malloy. Regardless, they were approved the following week, and both policies that they took out were for $494, and they both had this double indemnity clause. So in total now, there's $3,576 up for grabs. Like that's the insurance amount on Michael, which in today's money is $81,840.
Between 5.
Between 5. Yeah. So the plan the men came up with, they believed, was so simple, it was laughable. They didn't need to shoot him, like draw a gun. There was no intent on putting any kind of effort in killing Michael. What they wanted to do was that Tony was just going to lift the closure. Remember I told you he cut off Michael from alcohol?
Yeah.
He decided he was just going to let it flow, and that they all figured that Michael's alcoholism would do it. Okay. So they all understood, the plan might not go the way they anticipated. Frank and Tony brought in a couple other speakeasy regulars they knew that would be willing to bump someone off for cheap as a backup plan.
Okay.
Their names were Edward Smith and John McNally. They both were career criminals and were enthusiastic to be offered a job.
Oh,
no matter how illegal, right? It was the magic word during the Great Depression.
That's right. J-O-B.
So they signed on for $800 upon the death of Michael. That's a pretty big cut.
That is.
But they were only going to get it if they were needed. So with the policies and this contingent plan in place, now the murder trust is ready to begin acting on what they're going to do.
Right.
Well, one evening late in December 1930, Michael walks into Marino's bar, and he was strangely welcomed with open arms. No tongue lashing about begging, no remarks about his bar tab. Tony explained that the competition between the speakeasies was becoming fierce and he really needed to change his rules. So to reward Michael for his loyalty, his drinks would be on the house from now on. So as the hours passed, Michael poured whiskey and gin down his throat while members of the murder trust looked on. When a glass was emptied, someone was always standing close by to fill it up again. Michael drank and then drank some more. As the other patrons began to leave and the night wore on, Michael eventually called it quits for the evening. He thanked Tony and, for his gracious hospitality, and he left to find a place to lay his head for the night. The following day, he was back, and Tony hopped to it to fill his glass up and repeated the previous day. And Michael drank and he drank some more. And Tony poured. And after drinking his fill, Michael left again for the night. So by the third day that this is going on, Tony's annoyed. Okay.
Tony is cracking me up because it's like, do you think that alcoholism is like a plug you just pull?
Right.
Just load them up and everything will explode. No. And plus, he's an Irishman, Tony. This man was built. Let me tell you. You are way past your bedtime.
I love the stereotypes, right? I'm thinking like one night of drinking hard ain't going to do it.
Yeah, right? Night 3 and you're irritated.
Yeah, you're irritated. Like, no, this man's an alcoholic. It's going to take a lot to poison him by alcohol.
Tony, you're going to need a long game if you're going to be playing this hand.
Exactly. I'm like, these are amateurs, right?
Exactly.
So this third day, after making himself a sardine sandwich, Michael pulled up a seat at the bar, and Tony's watching all of his liquor go down Michael's throat for free.
Seething. Right? Yes.
Yeah. And he's seething, and Michael looks no worse for wear. And as he left the bar that night, there was only a faint hope that he would taken out by being exposed to the elements on the street.
Oh, it's December. Yeah, right.
Like, maybe winter will get him, right? Maybe, in combination with the alcohol. The desperation of their situation starts to settle in for the murder trust, and Michael's endurance with drink is beginning to become clear to them. Yeah. The reality of this easy money that they really hoped to obtain was just forcing this group to reassess the situation. Right. Michael was drinking by the bottle, and he was getting rip-roaring drunk, but never showed symptoms of being like pissed drunk, right? Like he was drunk, but he wasn't at the limit. He knew
his limits, his body, his brain. Yes.
Yeah. There was no like alcohol poisoning. There's no vomiting. He's not passing out even. Yeah. So Tough Tony began to argue that it was time for a more straightforward approach. Okay. He wasn't one to continue with subtlety as if there was any other choice, right? But the group discussed, and the majority agreed that they would continue as planned. Red was the one who came up with the next idea. Gaining the attention of the other members of the murder trust, he suggested that they switch the whiskey and gin out for something stronger and toxic.
Okay.
So why don't they start pouring wood alcohol into his glass? And wood alcohol is impure alcohol or denatured alcohol, paint thinner.
Oh my
Paint
gosh.
thinner. Whatever you choose to call it, it's lethal,
Yeah.
right? Bellevue Hospital stated in 1927 that 3 drinks of 4% wood alcohol could cause blindness in people.
Oh my goodness.
So if Red poured a whole glass of this paint thinner, then Michael fully ingested, that maybe he would finally succumb to the drink. And like it had to happen. Like they're all like, it's got to happen, right?
Sure.
So Daniel, Frank, and Tony were enthusiastically on board. The wood alcohol was purchased for 10 cents a can, and the endeavor began that night. So Michael begins drinking a regular old shot of whiskey that evening. He drank 3 or 4 shots to blunt his wits before they started pouring him straight shots of paint thinner. And concerned that he would be able to tell that the shots were being played with, Red watched Michael's expression for any kind of sign of,
Telling. Yeah. Like not,
right?
For sure.
But Michael continued to ask for more. And the murder truck just watched in stunned astonishment as Michael continued to drink the paint thinner. And leaving that night, the group was disappointed. The Daily News reported, quote, that Michael merely slept it off and appeared at the speakeasy the next day, none for the worse of his exposure.
Oh my gosh.
End quote. I know. The following day when Michael showed up, they again started with the whiskey, then tainted it with wood alcohol, which soon then became glasses of nothing but paint thinner. And Michael remained oblivious to this betrayal by his so-called friends. He never noticed the taste, and he actually seemed to like it. He would drink it all and ask for more. This irritated the gang, seeing that, is he immune? Like, what the hell? Right? So they set out a challenge to speed things up. Daniel asked Michael, let's see how much we can drink. We're going to have a contest. So Red sets up to pour Michael some shots of the paint thinner, and Daniel has drinks of whiskey. Shot after shot, Michael drank his friend under the table.
Oh my gosh. I'm so impressed.
Guess how much he drank? He drank a quart and a half of paint thinner that night. I think there's what, 2
a quarter of a gallon. Yeah, 4 quarts make a gallon.
So yeah, a little over a quarter gallon.
Yeah, I'm thinking, were you really sold paint thinner? Were you sold water?
Yeah, right.
Because I don't get it.
What kind of jacked up paint thinner is this?
Thank you. Yeah. Paint thinner, quote unquote, air quotes.
Oh, so the same story would continue several nights in a row until like these people are like, something has to give. Red would pour Michael shots of wood alcohol just as quickly as they were drank. Finally, Michael started to lean and sway one night. His words were slurred and he was incoherent. The final drink took him to the floor. He finally passes out. And the men watching, they'd been waiting for this.
For days.
Right.
Yeah.
Red's success gave him a sense of pride. And the murder trust, they had been beginning to lose money on this scheme. They'd been paying the monthly and the weekly premiums, buying the liquor and the poison. The murder of Michael wasn't a cheap enterprise that they thought it was.
Yeah, the shit adds up when you're home.
So Michael's passed out on the floor, and Frank bends down to take his pulse to check and see if he's still breathing. And then, as if to slap the murder trust in the face, Michael begins snoring.
That is fucking hilarious. I love that.
I know. So they're like, okay, he's not dead. He's sleeping.
Oh my.
But maybe he's gone blind. Like maybe this is finally the tipping point. Like maybe finally. They're thinking, is he nauseous? He's not nauseous. Like his stomach is like an iron stomach.
I'm not trying to be like gross funny, but you know what this reminds me of? What's that Jim Carrey movie? Me, Myself, and Irene, when he tries to put down that cow in the road. You remember that? And every time he walks away, the cow, it's just like, and I'm not trying to say it's funny like that. This group of idiots, just to even keep up, like, I don't see how you can, not one time in the days that you're trying to kill this guy, no one had a crisis of conscience. This is a sign from God. 8 days in and nothing.
Right. this paint thinner is supposedly going to make somebody go blind if they have 3 shots of it. And here he's drinking quarts and gallons of the shit.
For days.
For days.
And then snores. I just want to kiss him on the forehead. Way to go, Mike. Way to go.
I know. So he ended up spending the night on the floor of Marino.
Oh.
Tough Tony, once again, he brought up the quick and dirty method. You know, he pats the gun on his hip and he's like, okay, we've sunk way too much money into this. We need to move. And Frank and Tony, they declined and they decided to plan another attempt to ensure now that they received that double indemnity policy.
Oh, right.
Drinking yourself to death doesn't qualify as an accident. And neither would some of the other attempts that they were going to follow. So the thought process was they're going to continue to do what they need to do. Frank pitched this plan. He said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to soak some oysters in a jar of the paint thinner and serve them to Michael. He had run into this fatal mixture as an undertaker. I guess it happened to someone. So they're hoping that this now is going to cause like acute indigestion when the oysters go down. Maybe it's going to be like concrete in Michael's stomach.
Okay.
So early January, Michael makes his way to the speakeasy and he took a seat at the bar. Although he'd been drinking paint thinner for weeks now and the entire building smelled of this chemical.
Oh my gosh.
He didn't seem the least bit fazed. After a few drinks, Tony placed a plate of oysters that had been marinating in the poison for a few days in front of Michael. As they played cards at a nearby table, Frank and Tough Tony look on. Michael downed oyster after oyster, and he thanked Tony for his generosity at providing him such a delicious meal.
Oh my gosh.
After pushing away the plate and there's no sign of any kind of illness and no complaints, they're just looking at him like, what the fuck? And,
absolutely.
And Michael's like, another drink, garçon.
I love your French, Michael. Michelle. Yes.
A few of the regular patrons of this place, not involved in scheme, they began to see something. On, right? The men involved were constantly whispering and huddled in frantic discussions. The murder plot had become desperate. And it's becoming an obsession for these guys. But it wasn't supposed to take this long. So rather than give up, the men continued almost as a matter of principle. Like they're like, we're going to kill this fucker. Like, So walking away from the oysters that night, Tony asked Michael how he was feeling. And Michael answered, never felt better in all my life.
I love it.
So after a thoughtful discussion, Red's next plan wins out. They chose to try to poison sardines. On many nights after beginning his binge, Michael would saunter up to the free lunch tray and make himself a sardine sandwich. So the next night, Red purchased a can of sardines. After opening it, he left them open on a shelf to rot for a few days. And when Michael came in a few evenings later, Red smeared the rotten fish on a piece of bread. He added to it metal shavings that he got from a local machine shop, bits of broken glass, and carpet tacks before placing one more slice of bread on top.
Oh my gosh.
Once he gives this to Michael with your first shot of the paint thinner, he offers the sandwich and Michael hungrily accepts it.
Yeah.
And he begins eating. So Red's waiting. And he could see in his mind's eye the metal shavings and the carpet tacks, like attacking Michael's organs and shredding.
Right, cutting them up. Sure.
Yeah, like, okay, he's eating this.
Yeah.
But Michael didn't seem to feel a thing. He thanked Red for such a well-crafted meal and asked for another drink after he ate the entire sandwich.
Hats off to you, Irishman. Honestly, I am so impressed. And just that they're so dumbfounded.
Yes.
I can't blame them. I mean, if I was of that mindset and that was my goal, I would just be like, what the F?
Yeah, like
honestly,
metal shavings, glass.
I mean, and the paint thinner for now, it seems weeks.
Right. And carpet tacks, like you're thinking like, okay, this has to kill him.
Metal shavings. Oh my gosh.
You're not digesting that.
No,
That's
right.
cutting your insides up.
How
Right?
are you? Oh, maybe he doesn't have teeth,
Yeah,
because it's
maybe.
30s. Because I'm like, man, if something hits my tooth, I'm all like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
You know?
So on his way home one cold winter evening, Tony was thinking back to early 1932 when he had an affair with a lovely blonde hairdresser, and her name was Mabel Carlson. She was 27. Originally from Washington, D.C., Mabel moved to New York in December of 1931 after her mother died and her marriage failed. She found herself sitting at Marino's bar regularly, and then he brought her into his home, much to his wife Eleanor's dismay.
Oh, fuck
Yeah.
no.
That's when Eleanor left her husband after Mabel became a regular fixture of the
Okay.
house.
Good for her.
Yeah, and Eleanor moved in with her sister-in-law and father-in-law. On March 17, 1932, at 10:30 in the morning, the police were called to the Marino apartment where Mabel was found unresponsive in bed. And this is why I mention it. You might be sitting there like, we were talking about Michael.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
this is important. So the autopsy said she died of pneumonia and acute and chronic alcoholism. So Tony had told authorities that she'd been drinking heavily over the course of a few weeks and she'd refused to stop or seek medical help. There were signs that she'd been physically abused and the bruises had been covered up by like makeup. And Tony had taken out a $2,000 life insurance policy on Mabel and he collected it in less than a week after she died. So after our story ends and Michael's death happens, I mean, I told you at the beginning, it was his murder. It would come out that Tony force fed the whiskey down Mabel's throat until she could no longer drink. He helped her to bed, which he had moved under an open window. He poured ice water on the mattress, stripped her naked, and wrapped her in cold, wet bedding.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So leaving her under the open window, she succumbed.
Yeah.
The
elements, of course, for sure.
And being drunk as fuck, right? So Tony's like, he's thinking back to what he did to Mabel. And now he's got this new plan that they're going to try and do this to Michael. He'd been successful. So, okay. So he's like, we're going to do this.
How we're going to do it. Yeah.
So in mid-January, Michael came into the bar and Tony sat with him, had a conversation for hours with him, making sure that Michael's glass was never empty. He knew that for this to work, Michael couldn't just be drunk. He needed to be unconscious.
Yes.
One weather report described it to be an Arctic day that day, which would be a perfect setting for a man out to be surrendered to the elements. But after drinking himself into a stupor, Tony and Frank carried Michael to Frank's roadster, put him in the back seat to drive him to Crotona Park, where he would be dragged to a park bench and laid down. So they carried a bucket of water with them. And once he was laid out on the bench, they stripped the clothes off his chest, poured water over him, and took off back to the speakeasy, confident that there wouldn't be any way that Michael was going to survive this.
Right.
The next day, Tony walks into his bar to start the day, and he probably would have been curious as to the fate of his loyal customer, but it wouldn't take long for him to discover what happened. During the night, Michael had woke up to find himself freezing on a park bench. He made his way half a mile through a cold New York winter to the back of Marino's bar. Red, who was not party to this plan, let Michael in. He was woken up because he was sleeping in the bar. He was woken up by Michael and he let him in to sleep in the bar. So Michael made his way down to the basement where Tony found him the following day sleeping next to the heat of the gas stove.
Oh my gosh. This is so... I'm glad this is giving Tony a hard time because he sounds like such a motherfucker. I'm glad that this is a thorn in his side.
Yeah. That day, they were like, okay, we're waving the white flag for the day. But the group decides they got to up their game because they're determined now. They're going to kill Michael somehow. It's believed that Michael would have been in severe amounts of pain, struggling to reach warmth that night, just as a side note. The next attempt would be more violent on him. Harry Hershey Green was a cab driver, described as a deeply disturbed young man who saw very little value in human life. At 24, he hadn't killed anyone yet, but it wasn't due to lack of interest. He admitted that he was keen on the idea if an opportunity presented itself, but he needed to get paid for it. So being a friend of Joe Maglione, if you remember, he was the other counterfeiter with Tough Tony.
Yes.
Hershey was finally going to get his chance. He would happily accept $150 to run over Michael in his cab.
Okay.
That's the next plan. So one evening in late January, Hershey came to Marino's and met the rest of the gang. During the discussions of how to get the job done, he was told, quote, if there's any doubt, back over the bastard and make sure the job's done right, end quote. Hershey found a nice stretch of road where he'd be able to gain quite a bit of speed. On January 30th, 1933, Michael was plastered with wood alcohol. The smell, the smell was just from his pores. He fell limp around midnight. So they take him to Hershey's cab and they drove to that stretch of road that Hershey had found. Tough Tony and Red carried Michael out of the car and held him up by both arms. Hershey backed up a ways and he revved the engine and punched the gas. The car launched. Tony and Red are now prepared. They're holding up Michael and they're prepared to jump out.
Oh my God, right.
Right at the last possible moment. And then Joe yelled, stop. A woman had lit a lamp in her window. So this place they decided wasn't remote enough.
Right.
Hershey had Tony and Red put Michael back in the car and they needed to find somewhere else to carry out this plan. So just around the corner, they found a spot and they pulled Michael out of the car again. They stood him up and they're attempting this again.
Yeah.
On the first attempt, Tough Tony and Red were holding him up. And when they jumped to get out of the way, so did Michael. For someone on the edge of consciousness, he moved quickly. So they stood him up to try it again. And he dodged the car for the second time. The third time, they hit him. Okay. His body created a loud thump and it rolled onto the hood and up the windshield. Michael wasn't moving on the ground now.
Right.
Hershey went up the hill to come back and give him a second go. But when he came around the corner, there was a car stopped at Michael's body.
Oh.
Yeah. Hershey picked up Red and Tough Tony and continued back to the speakeasy to regroup. So they're not sure. They're sure like he's dead. They're positive he's dead, but they haven't checked.
Yeah.
And they're sure like the next day they're going to read all about this body that was found on the road.
Sure.
You know? But the next day there's no article in the newspaper. Nothing. Nothing mentioned of this incident. So they're thinking like, how did he survive? And
What's happened?
He was hit at 50 miles an hour. So they're thinking like, how the fuck did he survive this?
Right.
Everyone had seen him fly into the air, basically. So where was he? They couldn't collect the insurance money without proof of a body.
Oh, yeah.
So they decided to wait for a couple days. And if he was alive, they figured he'd come back.
Oh, he'd pop in. Right.
But Tony wasn't satisfied. No body meant no insurance money. They needed a body. So less than a week after the attempt, Tony sent everyone on a quest for a substitute victim. The victim needed to look like Michael, so they could put Nicholas Mallory's ID in his pocket to identify him.
Right.
On February 6th, Hershey took his cab out to hunt for the 5'6", 180-pound substitute victim in the speakeasies of Harlem with Tony, Joe, Tough Tony, and Red. They're hunting for a victim. Joseph Patrick Murray was a 31-year-old unemployed plasterer's assistant. He'd spent the beginning of February 6th looking for work, but had gotten quite thirsty and decided to stop at the speakeasy on the first floor of his apartment building for a few drinks. On his way out the door, he was approached on the sidewalk by Tough Tony, who offered him a job. After accepting, they ushered him into Hershey's cab and took him back to Marino's. Tony was aghast at the resemblance between Michael and the new victim, and he poured drink after drink, waiting for the man to lose consciousness. Once he landed in a crumpled heap on the floor, they put Nicholas Mallory's ID in his pocket and piled him into Hershey's cab with everyone else, like they all went. And around midnight, Tough Tony and Red were holding Joseph Murray up the same way they had held up Michael, and Hershey was aiming the cab right at him. It took seconds for Joseph Murray to end up under the wheels with a shocking thump and crunch. Just after the cab pulled to a stop to check the vitals on their new victim, someone shouted that a car was coming. So Tough Tony and Red piled back in the cab and they headed back to the speakeasy, abandoning another body in
oh my gosh.
the street. And this is where I'm going to end part 1
What? Are you, Tanya? I can't even. I know I am. I'm fucking hating Tony, tough Tony, fucking Joe.
Right?
Fred, these idiots.
These idiots, right? Yeah. Hershey with his fucking cab. Yeah.
The fucking Hershey in the cab. And then they killed that girl. They're just
horrible people.
They are horrible people. And now you're making us wait because you're cruel and you're hateful, Tanya. I'm kidding. This is a fucking excellent story. I can't believe, you think 1930, when I think 1930, to be honest, I'm always like, what am I doing for deodorant? What am I doing for sanitary napkins? How's my hygiene? And I'm thinking that alcoholism is rampant.
Yeah.
The country is poor. They're in the depression and there is nothing happening. This is like...
Yeah, there's no jobs. There's nothing for anyone to do all day but get drunk.
Exactly.
And, or commit crimes, I guess.
Yes. Print fake money and pull life insurance policies. That's the kind of survival world it is apparently in 1930s. Really not seeing much change 100 years later, but we'll see.
Everything's just gotten a little bit more difficult.
It sure has. It sure has. Well, thanks, Tanya.
Well, thank you, Shannon.
It's bittersweet, but I am very much looking forward to the...
Don't Google it. None of you Google it.
No, I'm not. I can't wait. No way. No way.
Before everyone signs off, just reminding you to hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening to. And we also have a Patreon. If you enjoy our weekly episodes that we publish for free, if you'd like to join our Patreon or our members only group, you can go to patreon.com/TNT Crimes, or you can subscribe through the Apple app. And what that means is you get an extra episode a week if you subscribe to the highest tier. In Patreon, there's lower tiers, but Apple only offers one price. So you get one extra episode a week, and you also get this episode ad-free and early release. We usually release on Mondays, and you would get this episode a couple days earlier. So we have a website, crimesandconsequences.com. So if you'd like to check out some merch that we have there, you can do that. We have to catch it up soon. So our episodes are on
the lookout for the new merch that we're working on.
Yeah, we're working on some new merch too. So it's all very exciting with all of the changes we've been having. So thank you, Shannon, for becoming my co-host too.
Oh, my pleasure, Tanya.
Yeah.
I love you and I love working with you. So it works out great.
Yeah. So I'm having fun. So until our next episode, everyone.
Yes. Take care and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.